Once upon a time, in a small peaceful city, life was often a daily struggle for a woman named KAMSI. KAMSI had been working as a waitress in the city of Aba for a couple of months. KAMSI didn't have a permanent position but got called in whenever there was work. She worked for a popular company that served food and drinks at different events held at outdoor locations. One evening, KAMSI was feeling a serious headache, but she had to prepare for work the next day as she had been pre-informed to serve food at a traditional wedding ceremony in another town about 3 hours away from Aba. She took some herbs and managed to sleep. The next day, she woke up still feeling the headache, but she managed to go to work. She arrived early at the venue with the other servers. They made sure to check that everything was ready and set before the event started, since it was the wedding of a very influential businessman's daughter named Obiageli. KAMSI had already worked at several events of this kind, so she knew well what her responsibilities were. There were many guests attending the celebration, as Obiageli's father was a very wealthy man. The event started and other waitresses soon got exhausted, running between the tables with trays full of delicious food and drinks. Unlike her co-workers, KAMSI didn't complain about the workload and irregular hours, but rather rejoiced at the large sum of money she would earn. The fact was that she was working for her 3 children, Somto, Ifunanya and Chisom, who would be waiting for her at home. She forced herself to do the best she could to provide them with everything they needed. Somto, Ifunanya and Chisom were the meaning of KAMSI's life, and she was ready to do anything to make sure they were all right. KAMSI's husband, Uchenna, died 5 years ago, and it was an extremely painful blow for her. Not a day went by that she didn't think of him and the happy days they had spent together. Of course, KAMSI understood that there was no going back and that she needed to adapt to her new life moving between the tables. At the wedding, KAMSI made sure that every guest had everything they needed. Then at some point, KAMSI looked at the stage and saw the wedding couple standing on it. Obiageli, the bride, was dressed in an expensive outfit and accessories. She looked so beautiful and cheerful. KAMSI stood for a while and admired her, though she had never seen her before in her life. But when she saw the groom's face, she was shocked. Her eyes and mouth opened wide, and she nearly dropped the tray she was holding as her hands started to tremble. What? No way. That's impossible, KAMSI whispered. She was so shocked that she couldn't hear or see anything going on around her. KAMSI turned pale, and tears froze in the corners of her eyes. Her lips started trembling, and she felt dizzy and weak in the legs. At that moment, she felt as if she had seen a ghost standing in front of her. The fact was that standing next to Obiageli, the bride, was none other than Uchenna, her late husband, who supposedly died 5 years ago. There could be no mistake. KAMSI was 100% sure it was her husband. After all, 5 years wasn't long enough for her to forget how her own husband looked. Sure, Uchenna had put on a little weight and changed his hairstyle, but that was all that had changed about him. KAMSI began to fear and panic. At first, she thought she should just get up on the stage and get to the bottom of things right there and then. But when she saw the crowd of excited guests surrounding the newlyweds, she changed her mind. She couldn't carry on her job in such an agitated state. KAMSI was literally shaking from the realization that she had been deceived in such a shameless way. She had been mourning her husband Uchenna all this time, visiting his grave, crying and laying flowers on it. So Uchenna is not dead, but has been here in another town all this while, KAMSI thought. She patiently waited until her ex-husband stepped off the stage and went to his table. She set out to implement her plan, climbed the steps to the stage and took the microphone. She knew exactly what she was going to say to the newlyweds. However, the guests were so busy having fun that they didn't even notice KAMSI, the waitress, who had climbed up on the stage. For some inexplicable reason, it was only her boss who was visibly tense, realizing that something bad was about to happen. "Can I have a moment of your attention, please?" KAMSI said, taking the microphone in her hands. Just then, Uchenna, her supposed late husband, locked eyes with hers. She panicked, but continued her speech while keeping her gaze on him. Uchenna feared she would say something about him and quickly excused himself, heading to the restroom. KAMSI stood there with all eyes on her, watching as Uchenna fled. She wished she could just run after him, but she was already on stage and all attention was now on her. She managed to force a smile and said in a panicked tone, I just want to congratulate the bride Obiageli and groom Uchenna on this day of their traditional wedding. May your life be filled with. The guests were confused as the groom's name was not Uchenna. They didn't understand why a waitress was even on stage, stammering and speaking in a panic. At that point, the guests started to murmur. KAMSI didn't understand the reason for their indignation until a little later, when her boss literally dragged her off the stage and started berating her for what she had done. "What do you think you're doing, KAMSI? And who is Uchenna?" "The groom's name is Ebuka Wankwo. He's a businessman from Lagos. Why did you even think to get up on the stage? Your area of expertise is here between the tables." But there was no convincing KAMSI. She saw the fear that flashed in Uchenna's eyes, which meant that she was right, of course. Her boss was surprised at KAMSI's insistence and claimed that she mistook Ebuka for someone else. It looked very convincing, but KAMSI knew that her mind was not lying. "That's not Ebuka Wankwo. That's Uchenna, my ex-husband," KAMSI kept thinking. The guests quickly forgot about the incident and continued to have fun, celebrating the newlyweds. After all, weddings are always very eventful, and anything can happen there, whether it's a fight or a declaration of love. KAMSI left the venue as soon as she got paid for her work. The rest of the party was uneventful, but she never got a chance to get close enough to Uchenna to talk to him. KAMSI decided to put off getting to the bottom of things. After all, she did have 3 children waiting for her at home, and they loved her with all of their hearts. On the way home, KAMSI decided to stop by the store to get Somto, Ifunanya and Chisom some treats. She knew that her 2 daughters, Ifunanya and Chisom, liked roasted corn and African pear, while Somto preferred to eat the corn with coconut. She dipped her hand into the pocket of her dress where she had kept the money to pay, but was shocked to realize she had lost the envelope she got from her boss. Only then did KAMSI realize that she was in trouble. When KAMSI put the money in her pocket at the end of her shift, she didn't notice a large hole in it, which is how she lost her salary. "Oh my goodness, why didn't I just put it in my purse right away?" KAMSI thought, having had a hard time holding back her tears. The woman selling the corn looked at her sternly, with undisguised irritation. "Madam, what's going on? Are you not going to pay? If not, please step aside and let me attend to other customers." KAMSI had never felt so ashamed in her life. Some people around who wanted to buy hot roasted corn began to grumble, and the situation was getting more unpleasant by the second. KAMSI was ready to leave the corn and go home empty-handed. Fortunately, someone came to her aid. A very pleasant young man, who was also waiting to buy corn as well, had been watching the situation develop. He stepped forward, asked the woman selling the corn how much KAMSI's purchase was, and paid for it. KAMSI thanked the man, picked up the corn, and left, wiping the tears from her eyes. She had just opened the gate to the compound when her 3 children rushed out and hugged her tightly. "Welcome, mommy," they said in unison, immediately pounding on the treat she brought them. "Calm down, Somto, Ifunanya and Chisom. The corn is not running away," Kamsi said with a smile. Surprisingly, she didn't feel all that bad about losing the money she had worked so hard to earn. The incident of the kind man who came to her rescue made her evening and pushed thoughts of Uchenna and the wedding out of her mind. Most of all, she was happy seeing the smiles on her children's faces. She believed that she would make more money as long as she continued to work hard, and soon things would get better. However, when Kamsi took a shower and went to bed, thoughts of Uchenna, her ex-husband, took over her mind again. Unintentionally, Kamsi let herself go on a trip down memory lane, which took her back 8 years to when it all started. She was a young, beautiful lady who was helping her mother with her fruit trade business after school. Uchenna had come to the market that day to buy fruits when he met Kamsi. They had a little conversation, and Uchenna started to come buy fruits very often from her. Soon, he opened up and told her his feelings. He felt the same way too. A few months later, they got married. Before the marriage, Kamsi didn't know much about where Uchenna actually worked, as he would often tell her he was a businessman. Whenever Kamsi tried to find out more about his line of work, Uchenna always changed the subject of the conversation. It was clear that he didn't want to talk about his job. Over time, Kamsi just stopped asking him about it and simply accepted the fact that Uchenna wasn't going to let her into that part of his life. When he asked Kamsi to marry him, she didn't seem to care about it anymore. At first, life with Uchenna seemed like a fairy tale come true. The couple spent their honeymoon in Lagos, but later settled in Aba. Having rented a house, the first had a little baby boy, Somto, who was soon followed by a daughter, Ifunanya, and another daughter, Chisom. The children were born just 1 year apart from each other. Back then, Kamsi truly believed that her life was perfect and that there was nothing else she needed to be completely happy, as everything was going on well. Kamsi and Uchenna had an amazing relationship, and the young family had enough money to cover all of their needs. But then, strange things began to happen. First of all, there were changes in Uchenna's behavior. All of a sudden, he became very suspicious and extremely cautious. He was afraid to answer phone calls from unknown numbers and stopped opening the door to strangers. At first, Kamsi thought it was just a precaution, but then she realized that something was going on with her husband. "Honey, are you having some kind of problems?" Kamsi tried to ask him, but Uchenna flat out refused to talk about it. Then one day, he suddenly disappeared. There was no warning or anything. Uchenna simply got into his car and went to a business meeting. But when he did not come back home for dinner, Kamsi got worried. He didn't answer his phone, and Kamsi simply had no other way of contacting him. The next day, Kamsi went to the police, but the officer told her that she needed to wait for 3 days before she could list him as missing. Anything could have happened. A man can sometimes go off the grid for a bit and then return home as if nothing happened. There is no reason for concern yet. She wasn't sure what to do next, so she sent a message and informed his parents about the situation. Kamsi could feel in her heart that something terrible had happened. In fact, she didn't even know if her husband Uchenna was alive or if she would ever see him again. It was only then that Kamsi realized she didn't know anything about Uchenna's job or business. She couldn't even go to his office because she had no idea where it was. Moreover, she didn't find anything in his home office that could help her identify his place of work. At that point, a strange thought popped into Kamsi's head. Could it be that Uchenna is a fraudster? 3 days later, the police started searching for Uchenna, but they never found him. Moreover, in addition to Uchenna himself, all the money disappeared from the family's account, and his car was found several miles outside the city. It was parked in the forest and had broken windows and mangled doors. When forensics examined the car's interiors, they found blood stains on the seats and concluded that the blood could be Uchenna's. Despite the fact that Uchenna's body was never found, everyone assumed that he was dead. KAMSI was no exception, even though at first she truly believed that the police would find Uchenna. Uchenna's parents had sent her a message asking her to visit them so they could take her to a powerful spiritualist who would tell them if Uchenna was truly dead or alive. KAMSI didn't go, telling them she didn't have anyone to leave her children with and that she didn't believe in such things, finding them fetish. The police will do their job. It's hard to even imagine what KAMSI, now a single mother, had to go through before she came to terms with her new reality and found the strength to move on with her life. It was only her children, Somto, Ifunanya and Chisom, who helped KAMSI find the will to keep going. 5 years flew by like a flash. During this time, KAMSI kept thinking about Uchenna, who had simply disappeared from her life, leaving behind many unresolved issues. KAMSI still didn't know where Uchenna worked or why he was killed. She didn't believe that her husband was a criminal, but she didn't believe that his death was an accident either. And now, having arrived at that wedding, she saw that he was alive and well, standing next to his rich bride. All this reminded her of her own wedding, when she stood next to Uchenna and felt truly happy. On the other hand, KAMSI felt that getting involved in her now ex-husband's life wouldn't really solve anything. How would it help me if I caused the sin? If Uchenna wanted to, he would have come home, but he chose to leave me with our 3 children and disappear, KAMSI thought sadly. That night, she didn't get much sleep as all thoughts swarmed in her head, making it difficult to relax and doze off even for a bit. Nevertheless, the next day promised KAMSI new troubles and worries. Having had a hasty breakfast, she took her 3 children to school and thanked her neighbor for taking care of them the day before when she returned late. Mrs. Anyawu, a woman in her 70s, loved KAMSI's children. She usually helped her for free, taking on the role of a nanny. That morning, before KAMSI had gone even half a mile away from the house, a man stepped out of a car parked on the side of the street. When she turned her head, it was Uchenna. He waved for her to get into the car. At first, KAMSI felt rather agitated and somewhat scared, but seeing that there were a lot of people around, she decided to accept the invitation. Of course, Uchenna didn't throw himself into her arms and didn't ask for forgiveness. Instead, he kept saying that it wasn't his fault. According to Uchenna, 5 years ago, he needed to disappear and cut all ties that could eventually lead to him. At that moment, KAMSI realized that her first guess was correct. Uchenna really was a fraudster who moved from place to place, deceiving his investors. When they were about to catch him, he changed his last name and getting married and thus acquired temporary families. This wasn't the first time he staged his own death either. So, how many ex-wives do you have around the country? KAMSI exclaimed. I don't think you need to know about that. But I never loved anyone as much as I loved you. Uchenna hurried to reassure her. KAMSI didn't doubt for a second that he was lying to her. She had finally learned to tell when she was being deceived and thus didn't believe a single word coming out of Uchenna's mouth. Meanwhile, Uchenna kept talking and talking about how all these years he only thought about his family but was afraid to come back. KAMSI quietly listened to her now ex-husband and only at the end of his monologue did she reply, "Who are you trying to deceive, Uchenna? You will never ever see your children again. They think you are dead and that's how it's going to stay. You have a new life, a new name and a new wife, so go ahead and live your new life. But remember that one day your house of cards will come crumbling down and you have to answer before the law for everything you did." Uchenna turned pale and started saying something about having left his criminal life in the past. KAMSI didn't really believe him, but chose not to dwell on it. Instead, she got out of the car and went about her business. Finally, leaving her past in the past, she knew that now she definitely wasn't going to see Uchenna ever again. With each step she took, Her confidence grew stronger. For the first time in several years, she felt free. Now, she was no longer held down by the memory of her husband who disappeared under mysterious circumstances, leaving her with her 3 young children in her care. A few months later, Uchenna was running yet another scam, and this time he got caught, which got him featured in many news reports. KAMSI took it rather calmly and didn't even feel even a drop of sympathy for her ex-husband. Uchenna got what he deserved, a 10-year sentence in jail. Hope you enjoyed the story. Leave a comment on what you think are the moral lessons of the story. Thanks for watching.